I became friends with a fellow by the name of Carl Morgan, who was an editor of the Windsor Star at the time. We met at the press club. Or first of all, he said, have you ever written a book, or have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, no, actually, I've thought of it, but I've never had a subject or anything. So he said, well, what do you know about the auto industry? And I said, absolutely nothing. He said, do you want to write a book about it? And I said, sure, why not? And there's a huge sense of pride in Windsor that they helped put Canada on wheels. And in many respects, Windsor is the city that basically developed the auto industry in Canada because of the beginnings of Morton McGregor, who was with Ford, developed Ford of Canada way back in 1904. And it all started from there and mushroomed and became quite a history of Windsor generally. But the neat thing about the first book was that it was about the auto industry per se, and looking at old companies that had gone by the board. And at one point in Windsor, there were, I think about 24 different companies that established in Windsor to develop and sell their automobiles, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it.
Great. So what was the research process like for your book, Turning Points, the Detroit Riot?
If you're familiar with Ernest Hemingway and his writing, some journalist asked him what he thought about writing. And Hemingway just looked at him and said, it's good to have written, taking it into the past tense. It's good to have done it, but doing it is really quite a slog. I guess the whole idea of Windsor history kind of took me by surprise. I moved down to Windsor in 1979, and I was struck at the time that all of the history that was basically talked about at that time was the War of 1812. And most of the historians concentrated on that era. And I got looking into Windsor history, and the Detroit Riot's a case in point, because I had a personal involvement with it to some extent, in that we had cousins, distant cousins, living in Detroit at the time. And so my parents had called them and said, well, you know, do you want to come to Canada as a refuge? And we were living up in Midland, Ontario at the time. And it struck me that nobody talked about all this kind of stuff, and yet there was a wealth of material. And I'm pleased to say that since that time, when I started writing about it, these other areas of interest that had never been covered. And since that time, a lot of other writers have done the same and picked up and realized what a wealth of material there is beyond just the War of 1812. So it was good. But I was despondent. I didn't know what to do. I had a book that was virtually finished, and so I relegated it to the bottom drawer. And I went to Amherstburg, where one of my favorite bookstores was, a little place called Tempest Books. And the young lady there basically got me hooked up with Natural Heritage when I told her and lamented the story that this thing's in the bottom drawer. And she said, basically try them out.
And then they published a lot of local regional histories as well. So
yeah. And
yeah, I remember them talking to me at Canadian Booksellers Association trade show, and they were so thrilled to have your book. They were just delighted.
Yeah, well, without you, it would never have come to light, I think. So, I'm rather pleased. And,
yeah.